They laughed yesterday, pointed fingers, wrote your ending in permanent ink. But overnight, the script burned. The tables screamed. And now the loudest name in the room is standing between you and the fire. Funny how power works, isn't it? One moment you're invisible. Next moment, the world's richest disruptor is defending you like the truth just woke up angry. Stay still. Listen closely. Because when everything flips this fast, it's never an accident, it's exposure. They never notice the shift while it's happening. That's the funniest part. Power doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It slips its hand into someone else's pocket and walks away smiling. Yesterday, the rules felt solid, unmovable, like concrete poured over your feet. People spoke confidently because they thought the ground belonged to them. They thought alliances were permanent, loyalties were stitched into skin, and outcomes were already decided behind closed doors where you weren't invited. But power hates staying still. It gets bored. It flips when no one's looking. Overnight, the air changes. The same voices soften. The same faces look confused, like actors who forgot their lines halfway through the play. You start noticing who suddenly goes quiet, who deletes words, who pretends they were always neutral. That's when you realize the shift didn't create new players. It exposed the ones who were already there, hiding behind borrowed confidence and borrowed strength. Power doesn't make people loyal. It reveals who is pretending to be. When the balance tilts, alliances crack like cheap paint. People who stood shoulder to shoulder now step a few inches apart, just enough to deny they were ever close. The brave disappear. The loud become careful. The ones who benefited most from the old order suddenly remember morals, rules, patience. That's not growth. That's fear wearing a tie. Because when power changes direction, it drags secrets into the light, and secrets hate daylight more than lies do. You see, alliances aren't built on belief. They're built on advantage. The moment advantage changes hands, belief evaporates. Overnight shifts don't reward the strongest voices. They reward the quiet observers who were watching patterns instead of people. The ones who understood that power is a mood, not a possession. Today it protects. Tomorrow it hunts. And anyone who tied their identity to its previous direction now looks naked. What makes it delicious is how fast they pretend this was always going to happen. As if they knew. As if they planned it. As if they weren't laughing a few hours ago. That's the magic trick. Power flips. And suddenly everyone claims they were standing on the winning side all along. But their hesitation betrays them. Their pauses. Their sudden politeness. You can hear the math running in their heads, calculating how close they can stand to you without being seen as guilty by association. Overnight shifts turn friends into strategists and enemies into spectators. The room rearranges itself without moving a single chair. You're still standing in the same place, but now the space around you feels different. Heavier. Charged. Because once power exposes alliances, it can never unexpose them. You can't unsee who flinched first. You can't forget who needed reassurance. You can't ignore who suddenly wants to talk things out. That's why overnight changes scare people more than slow decline. There's no time to rehearse innocence. No time to build a narrative. Masks fall mid-sentence. Smiles crack under pressure. And the ones who relied on borrowed power realize too late that it never belonged to them. They were just renting confidence at a discount. And the lease expired without warning. So when the shift happens, don't rush to celebrate. Watch. Listen. Let them show you who they are now that the rules rewrote themselves. Because the real reveal isn't who gained power, it's who lost protection, who lost certainty, who lost the luxury of pretending they were untouchable, and who is now standing very still, hoping the spotlight moves before anyone notices how deeply they were standing on the wrong side of the flip. Public defense is a strange kind of noise. It sounds brave on the surface, heroic even, but underneath it rattles cages people forgot they were sitting in. The moment someone powerful speaks your name out loud, the room freezes. Conversations pause mid-breath. Screens light up, smiles tighten. Because when defense goes public, nothing stays private anymore. It drags shadows into places where shadows were comfortable pretending they didn't exist. Enemies hate visibility more than they hate defeat. When attacks were quiet, when whispers traveled faster than truth, they felt safe. Safe to twist, safe to suggest, safe to damage without fingerprints. But a public defense rewrites the risk. Suddenly, every move has witnesses. Every word has consequences. And the ones who thrived in silence realize they're being watched by people they never planned to face. Private enemies are cowards by design. They operate inside messages, closed rooms, half jokes that carry poison. They rely on ambiguity, on the idea that if nothing is clearly said, nothing can be clearly proven. Public defense tears that comfort apart. It forces lines to be drawn. You're either seen standing against it or standing with it. And standing against it now costs more than it ever did before. That's when the behavior shifts. Attacks soften into concerns. Accusations turn into questions. The same people who were aggressive yesterday suddenly want to sound reasonable. Not because they've changed, but because the price of hostility just skyrocketed. Public defense doesn't silence enemies. It exposes their fear of consequences. It teaches them restraint through visibility. The funniest part is how quickly loyalty gets rewritten. People who never spoke up for you now hint that they always believed something wasn't right. Others distance themselves from earlier actions, pretending involvement was minimal, accidental, misunderstood. They start editing history in real time, because once defense becomes public, history becomes evidence, and evidence is dangerous when it points in the wrong direction. Private enemies don't want justice or truth. They want advantage without accountability. Public defense removes that luxury. It creates records, screenshots, quotes, witnesses. It turns what was once deniable into something permanent. And permanence terrifies people who built their power on flexibility and forgetfulness. You'll notice the sudden politeness, the careful wording, the invitations to clear the air. That's not reconciliation. That's damage control. They're trying to lower the temperature without admitting they lit the fire. Public defense doesn't end conflict. It changes the battlefield. The fight moves from shadows to daylight, where everyone can see who throws the first stone. And once that happens, private enemies start shrinking. They don't disappear, but they hesitate. They test reactions. They wait longer before speaking. Because now, every action might be noticed by someone who matters. Someone who doesn't forget. Someone who doesn't need rumors to decide what's real. Public defense also reveals who was benefiting from your silence. When someone speaks for you loudly, it interrupts systems that depended on you staying quiet. That disruption exposes motives. You begin to see who loses the most when the narrative changes. Those are the ones watching you closely now, measuring their distance, recalculating their next move. So let them adjust. Let them rewrite their tone. Let them pretend nothing happened. Because every public defense leaves a mark. It redraws the map of enemies and allies whether they admit it or not. And once the map changes, no one moves the same way again. Influence doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. Real influence walks into chaos like it owns the floor and lets everyone else trip over their own noise. When everything erupts, opinions flying, accusations stacking, emotions overheating, that's when influence becomes visible. Not through aggression, not through defense, but through control. The loudest voice in chaos is rarely the most powerful one. It's usually the most desperate. Chaos makes people reveal their hierarchy. Watch closely. Some rush to speak, to explain, to justify. Others wait. Waiting isn't weakness. Waiting is confidence disguised as patience. Influence understands timing. It knows that silence, placed correctly, terrifies people more than confrontation ever could. Because in chaos, everyone is begging for direction, even if they pretend they're not. When disorder spreads, influence doesn't react. It redirects. It doesn't argue with the storm. It becomes the eye. People naturally turn toward whatever feels stable when everything else feels loud. That's why influence grows fastest during collapse. It doesn't need permission. It doesn't need applause. It just needs everyone else to panic. You can always tell who has influence by how little they explain themselves. Explanation is for people seeking approval. Influence assumes attention. While others scramble to clean their image, influence lets others clean it for them. Rumors die faster when someone powerful refuses to acknowledge them. Accusations weaken when they hit something solid and don't leave a mark. Chaos creates urgency, and urgency makes mistakes. People speak too fast, promise too much, reveal motives they meant to hide. Influence waits for that. It lets the noise rise until the patterns become obvious. Who's emotional? Who's defensive? Who's performing? And who's watching quietly, already 3 steps ahead? The dangerous part is that influence doesn't look dangerous. It looks calm. It looks uninterested. It looks almost bored. That's what unsettles people. In chaos, everyone expects reaction. When none comes, they start filling the silence with their own fear. They imagine intentions. They exaggerate threats. They expose their own insecurity, trying to predict what isn't being said. Influence doesn't need to win arguments. It wins positioning. It lets chaos burn out the impatient while it remains untouched. And once the noise fades, people remember who didn't panic, who didn't flinch, who didn't beg to be understood. That memory becomes authority. You'll notice how decisions suddenly align with that calm presence. How opinions shift without being challenged. How narratives soften without being corrected. Influence works through gravity, not force. It pulls outcomes toward itself, while everyone else thinks they're choosing freely. That's why influence is most visible when everything else is unstable. Order hides power. Chaos reveals it. In calm times, everyone pretends they're equal. In chaos, the hierarchy becomes undeniable. Some react, some manipulate, some disappear, and some simply stand there, untouched, letting the noise exhaust itself. People confuse attention with influence. Attention screams. Influence waits. Attention demands. Influence attracts. When chaos peaks, attention burns itself out fast. Influence lasts. It becomes the reference point, the quiet standard everyone measures against once the shouting stops. And when the dust settles, no one remembers who spoke the loudest. They remember who controlled the temperature of the room, without raising their voice, who let chaos expose everyone else's weakness, who never rushed to defend themselves because they understood that true influence doesn't chase credibility. It lets credibility come looking for it, slowly, nervously, already aware that whatever stays calm in the middle of chaos is the thing that decides what happens next and what doesn't. Truth is funny when it stops being fragile. When it's weak, everyone steps on it, laughs at it, uses it like a disposable tool. But the moment truth becomes valuable, the rules change. Suddenly, it's not something to mock, it's something to guard. Protection doesn't come from morality, it comes from usefulness. And that's when people start pretending they always cared. Unprotected truth is lonely. It survives on courage and hope, and those don't scare anyone. People attack it casually, carelessly, because there's no cost, no witnesses, no consequences. They distort it, bend it, bury it under noise because it doesn't fight back. Not yet. But the moment truth connects to something powerful, money, influence, reputation, it stops being an easy target. It becomes an asset, and assets get security. You can feel the shift instantly. The same truth that was ignored yesterday is suddenly treated carefully. Words around it become cautious. Opinions slow down. People stop joking. They start asking what can be said and what shouldn't. That's not respect. That's fear of loss. Because valuable truth threatens systems built on convenience and lies. Protection doesn't mean everyone believes the truth. It means fewer people dare to attack it openly. That's the difference. Belief is optional. Risk is not. When truth gains value, attacking it becomes expensive. Careers wobble. Images crack. Questions get asked in places where answers are expected. So people adjust. They don't change their minds. They change their behavior. What's amusing is watching former critics suddenly become guardians. They don't defend the truth because they love it. They defend it because it now protects them too. Once truth is tied to something larger than opinion, it becomes dangerous to mishandle. It stops being personal and starts being strategic. You'll notice how narratives tighten, how misinformation suddenly gets corrected, how silence replaces speculation. That's not growth. That's containment. Valuable truth must be controlled, framed, managed. Not to hide it, but to keep it from exploding in unpredictable ways. Protection isn't about honesty. It's about damage limitation. Truth doesn't gain protection because it's right. It gains protection because it's consequential. When ignoring it costs more than acknowledging it, people pay attention. When dismissing it creates risk, people choose caution. That's the real currency. Not ethics, not justice, impact. Once truth is protected, it stops needing defenders like you expect. It defends itself through gravity, through implication, through association. People think twice before touching it. They phrase criticism carefully. They add disclaimers. They lower their tone. Because protected truth doesn't need to argue. It just needs to exist in the right context. And here's the part no one likes admitting. Truth doesn't care who protects it. It doesn't care why. It just uses whatever shield is available. Power, attention, fear, all tools. Once it's valuable, it survives comfortably in places it was never welcome before. That's why timing matters. Speak truth too early and you get crushed. Speak it when it's valuable and suddenly you're brave, important, necessary. Same words. Different protection. The world didn't change. The price did. So when you see truth being defended aggressively, understand what really happened. It crossed a threshold. It became useful to someone who can't afford to let it die. And once that happens, attacks turn subtle. Opposition becomes polite, and lies start pretending they were misunderstandings all along. Because protected truth doesn't need to shout anymore. It just watches who gets nervous around it and who suddenly decides to stand very still.